All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar tonight on exploring implicit bias. We are so glad that you are here. We know there is a plethora of other things you could be doing with your Thursday night. So Pete and I are really excited and encouraged that you would choose to spend your Thursday night with us here. We know you have a lot of things going on, but it's encouraging to us that you are spending this time on your personal and professional growth. We think this webinar will help you in both of those areas. So we are just glad you're here. And we do call it a webinar, but we will have lots of opportunities to be active and to have discussion. So if you can turn on your video, we would love to see your face. And then we will just get right started. Just as a note, we will be giving you the slide deck at the end. You'll also get a recording. So if you're one of those people that loves to take notes, and you feel like the slide's going by too fast, don't you worry, because the slide deck will be coming at you right after this meeting. So just so that you're aware of that. So just to introduce myself, my name is Sarah. I have my teaching experience from East Kentwood High School, which is the #1 most diverse school in the state of Michigan. And so I taught there for several years, and I taught geometry and pre-calculus and AP calculus. And now I work primarily for creating resources for Mathematic and CalcMedic. And so this topic that we're talking about tonight is one of the things that I am passionate about how we can make our classrooms more equitable. So thank you for joining us tonight, and we hope that you get a lot of value out of this webinar tonight. So my co-facilitator, Pete, he's going to introduce himself in just a second, but first, we are going to play a mini game. So mini game is something that I love to do with my students at the beginning of class. You can use it as an icebreaker or sometimes just to liven things up at the beginning of class. And so we're about to do this on the Zoom call because I know everything is just 500 more times more awkward over Zoom. So I thought this would be a good way for us to get started tonight. So what's going to happen is on the next slide, you're going to see a list of 5 jumbled words, and you're going to have 60 seconds or sooner, if somebody finishes sooner, to unjumble all of them. And once you have all 5 of them, you can put them in the chat. And the first person that enters in all 5 words, so make sure you do it as one thing, not as separate ones, is going to win. And in the spirit of collaboration, not only do you win, but everybody that's in your little discussion breakout room later is also going to win. And like any good game, we have some prizes, so get excited about that. So we're about to start with this game. As a little hint, we're kind of doing this James Bond style, you know, where like the title song like introduces all the themes. So you might see these words later in this webinar. Maybe that helps you in your strategy. All right, so get ready to type, but remember, don't press enter until you have all 5 of them. All right, on your mark, get set, go. Oh, we got one right here. Sarah Carvella, am I saying that right? Hopefully. She has all 5 words. We have soda, trust, hotel, monitor, and reflect. That was very, very speedy. Under 60 seconds. And Sarah, I'm writing your name down right now so that I can make sure you get your prize that will be coming into your inbox after this. So very, very good job. And if you're wondering how the word soda and hotel is going to come into play, just you wait. We've got some exciting things in store for you all. All right, Pete.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everybody. Really good to see all of you over Zoom and anybody that's watching this recording later. My name is Pete Grostek, and I am the Executive Director of Mathematic Foundation. And Part of my passion for this topic, implicit bias, comes from the fact that about 5 years ago, I became a certified mindfulness teacher as well. And that is something that we talk about quite a bit in my collaborative groups in that light. Before we start the webinar, the content for tonight, I would like to talk briefly about Mathematic Foundation. Now, I know some of you are aware of what we do, but for those that aren't, we started operations about a year ago, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit. And actually, our two founders, Lindsay Gallus and Luke Wilcox, are joining us here on the webinar tonight. On the screen, you can see our mission right there. Sorry. Our mission is really all about increasing equitable access to math education. We really feel like if we can improve the access and opportunity side of the equation, that the outcome side of the equation will improve as well. So we work to fulfill our mission by awarding scholarships to students in need who plan to pursue math or math-related degrees or careers after high school. We also award grants to teachers or schools in need for math resources or professional development. And incidentally, our application window for spring of 2023 is still open until the end of the day tomorrow, April 14th. So if you or a colleague or a student that you know might be interested in applying for one of our scholarships or grants, we encourage you to apply. In the email, I will have a link on how you can do that in the email after this webinar. So look for that as well. Lastly, I would like to mention that we can only give out as many scholarships and grants as we receive in donations. And so if our mission is in line with your personal philanthropic goals, we'd really appreciate it if you consider a donation down the road. And this is a good time for me to now flash up on the screen our 100% promise. So we work really hard to cover our operational costs through corporate grants and fundraisers so that 100% of individual donations go to students, teachers, and schools in need. And of course, we also, as a Mathematic Foundation, we host webinars like tonight. So let's talk a bit about what we're going to be doing tonight. So Sarah and I are going to lead you through first a couple of mini investigations to help us all explore implicit bias and some of its possible consequences. We're then going to talk about what can be done to mitigate some of the possible harmful effects of implicit bias and discuss some very specific strategies that you can use in your classroom. Now, we know many of you, either watching the recording or live here with us right now, are math educators. And so you will notice a math class kind of flavor to this presentation, but I do believe this content really is beneficial for anyone in any field. So to start, we are going to split you into two breakout rooms to facilitate these two mini investigations. Sarah will facilitate one while I facilitate the other. Hers takes a little bit longer, so when she's done, she'll come over to mine and I'll flop over to hers. The whole process will take about 8 minutes. So with that, let's go ahead and open up our breakout rooms and we will see you there. Right. Hello, breakout room number 2. Just going to wait another moment to make sure everybody was able to join. So for your first mini investigation, you're going to need to write down or type 2 very, very short answers. So if you have a scrap piece of paper close by, or you want to open up some sort of document that you can do that on your computer, I'd ask you to do that right now. Again, very short. You don't need a lot of space here at all. And also, please note that you are the yellow group. You are the yellow group, okay? So in just a moment, I'm going to show you a picture on the screen and ask you to write down answers to 2 questions, one at a time. Now, the only information that I can give you, you'll be able to see on the screen. So I can't give you any other context or clues, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and start the first question. So take a look at the picture, everything on the picture. And when you're ready, please answer this first question. Do you think this is a fair price for a one-night stay in this hotel? And I'm looking for a yes or a no. Give you about 10 more seconds for that. Okay, well done. Wonderful. Second question. What do you think is a fair price for a one-night stay in this hotel? Now, for this one, I'm just looking for a dollar amount, a fair price, dollar amount, without any qualifiers at the end, just a dollar amount. Okay, when you're ready, I have now put in the chat box a link to a Google form. And on the Google form, all I'm asking for you to do is indicate that you are the yellow group and whatever your fair price was. If you could do that, click on that link. That is all I need from you right now for this mini investigation. If for some reason you can't open that Google form, you're on a mobile device, if you're able to just direct or private chat me, Pete Grostic, you can do that and I'll submit it for you. Happy to do that as well. Okay. All right, so I need to be on the lookout for Sarah now to pop over in this direction. I knew her mini investigation was going to take a little bit more time, so don't worry. I prepared a few dad math jokes. So I always loved when I was in the classroom telling math jokes, and my kids who are 11 and 9, they love, air quotes, love my dad jokes. So here are some dad math jokes until Sarah arrives. All right, let's start with this one. If you know the answer, go ahead and put it in the chat. Okay, which of King Arthur's knights was responsible for constructing his famous round table? Which of King Arthur's knights was responsible for constructing his famous round table? Anybody know that one? Hey, there it is, Stephanie. Nice job. That was circumference, of course. Circumference. Nice. Okay, here's the next one. What did the math book say when the English book asked why it was so sad? What did the math book say when the English book asked why it was so sad? Oh my gosh, Stephanie, are you looking at the same website that I am? Yeah. You said, I just have so many problems. So many problems. Let's see if I can stump Stephanie. Okay. All right, how about this one? Why aren't there any 12-inch noses in the world? Why aren't there any 12-inch noses in the world? Well, because then it would be a foot. Then it would be a foot. All right, I still don't see Sarah, so I'm going to give you my whole list here. Hope you're enjoying these. All right, how about this one? Do you know why the 2 4s didn't go to the cafeteria for lunch? Do you know why the 2 4s didn't go to the cafeteria for lunch? They already ate. So the 2 4s. Yeah, there it is. Sarah, already 8. Sarah, our mini game show winner at the beginning. Nice job, Sarah. I think you'll like your prize too, by the way. You'll find out later. All right, what did the 0 say to the 8? What did the 0 say to the 8? And there's Sarah. Ready? Nice belt. Nice belt. Okay. All right. Go for it, Sarah. I'm going to join the other room.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome, breakout room.
Hello. Breakout room number 1. Good to see you. I'm just going to share my screen here real quick. Bear with me. All right. Move all of your lovely faces to my other screen. All right. We're ready to go. Okay. So for this mini investigation, you are going to have to answer 2 very short questions. So you may want to grab a scrap piece of paper or open up a doc on your computer. You don't need much space, so a sticky note will work too. All right, in just a moment, I'm going to show you a picture and ask you to answer 2 questions, 1 at a time. Before we go there, I want you to note that you are the blue group. Okay, the blue group, that's very important. Blue group. All right, let's get started. So here is the picture and your first question. Take a look at the picture. First question is, do you think this is a fair price for a one-night stay in this hotel? And for this, I'm just looking for a yes or a no. Just a yes or a no. I'll give you about 10 or 15 seconds for that one. All right, fantastic. Question number 2. What do you think is a fair price for a one-night stay in this hotel? And for this one, I'm just looking for a dollar amount, whatever you think that fair price is, without any context, just a dollar amount. No qualifiers at the end, if you don't mind. Okay, take about 10 or 15 seconds for that one as well. All right, when you're ready, I have just sent you in the chat a link to a Google form. It's a very, very short form. It's just asking you which group are you in, and you are the blue group, of course. And then what is the fair price that you just typed or wrote down? So if you wouldn't mind, open up that form, indicate you're the blue group and your fair price. If for some reason you cannot open up that form, if you want to just direct chat me, private chat me, your fair price, I can submit it for you. Happy to do that. Okay, I'm watching these come in. Looks like we're almost there. Okay, so I told the other group I knew that Sarah's mini investigation took a bit longer, so I actually prepared a number of what I call our dad math jokes. So combining the 2 best kinds of jokes, right? Math jokes and dad jokes. I have an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old, and I can tell you, they just love my dad math jokes. So, okay, before I do that, I'm just gonna monkey a little bit here. So you should be on pins and needles now. I'm just gonna monkey with the answer document that you all just submitted. Okay. Okay, good to go. All right, you ready for the first joke? If you know this, go ahead and type it into the chat, please. All right. Okay, first dad math joke. Which of King Arthur's knights was responsible for constructing his famous round table? If you know that one, Go ahead and type it in. Yeah, I can resend the form, Mary. There you go. And whoever direct chatted me, I got your answer in the sheet already, so you're good to go. Yes, Aaron, that was circumference. He constructed the famous round table. Of course he did. All right, next one. And we're just going to do these until Sarah closes our room here. What do you think the math book said when the English book asked why it was so sad? What do you think the math book said when the English book asked it why it was so sad? Yeah, Aaron, other Aaron. Nice job. I just have so many problems. So many problems. All right. Let's see if you know this one. Why aren't there any 12-inch noses in the world? Why aren't there any 12-inch noses in the world? There's Luke. Yeah, because then it would be a foot. Then it would be a foot. We check all the same sites, don't we? Of course we do. All right. One more quick one. What did the 0 say to the 8? What did the 0 say to the 8? Nice belt. See you back in the main room.
I was hoping to see some people outside. This is perfect. All right, Pete, it looks like you're still muted.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. All right, I'm sharing my screen. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, let's go ahead. Let's first debrief the hotel room activity, a little mini investigation, and then later on in the presentation, we'll talk about 10 most trusted, okay? All right, so before we do anything else, I would like to show you your distribution here. So let's let that load. Okay. So what we have here is we generally have folks in the yellow group up here at the top. These are sorted from in descending order from greatest to least here, top to bottom. We have the yellow group generally bunched up a random blue here. And then at the bottom, we have mostly blues with in the middle, some flip-flop between yellow and blue. Okay, so let's talk about what's going on here. Okay, so both groups saw the exact same picture. Okay, both group, yellow group and blue group, saw the exact same picture. And were asked the exact same question. So the first question you were asked is, do you think this is a fair price for a one-night stay in this hotel? And the second question was, what do you think is a fair price for a one-night stay in this hotel? The exact same picture, exact same questions. There's only one important difference, and that was the caption. The caption for the yellow group was $3,000 per night, and the caption for the blue group was $50 per night. And of course, that changed your answers, right? So this is an example about how an implicit tendency can be created based on the context that we set up for you in that mini investigation. What we'll discover in just a moment here is that implicit biases are based on our own experiences. In this case, we created this reference point for you based on the caption. And even though everything else was exactly the same, the picture and the questions, it created this this bunching effect where all the yellows were generally together and all the blues were generally together. I've done this with 100 people at a time, and same effect. You get pretty extreme case of bunching of yellows and blues. And it's important to note that nobody was conscious that they were picking a number lower or higher than the other group. You were sort of unwittingly influenced by the experience that we set up for you. And that's what implicit bias is. So let's go ahead and define implicit bias right now. This is a form of bias that occurs automatically and unintentionally. I'll add unconsciously, that nevertheless can affect our judgment, decisions, and behaviors. I'd just like to highlight 3 points for us all right now. The first important point to emphasize is the implicit part, this unconscious part of the definition. If we were aware of our biases, then by definition, they're no longer implicit, they're explicit, right? We sometimes call those prejudices when they have a negative connotation. Incidentally, this is one of the steps we can take to mitigate any harmful effects of implicit bias by making what is implicit more explicit. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later in the presentation. But what we're talking about today are those biases that we are not aware of. That's really important. We're not aware of them, okay? But never fear, there are things we can do about it before we get into doom and gloom. Number two, the second point I'd like to highlight for us is that we all experience these. So this is one of the outcomes of neuroplasticity, the fact that our brain changes based on our experience, right? This is based on the way we grew up, where we grew up, the people around us as we grew up. If you've ever wondered how a professional athlete can decide not to play their sport for an entire season because their team only offered them $10 million per season and they wanted more, there's no doubt that implicit bias is part of what's going on there. Certainly not the only factor, things like status and reputation factor in there, but it's undeniable that the context that that person is in, the athlete is in, creates some implicit biases that they may not be aware of. And lastly, it's really important to understand that our implicit biases tend to surface the most when we're experiencing what is called high cognitive load. This is just a fancy term for when we're stressed out and overwhelmed. And of course, as most of us are educators, educators often experience high cognitive load, right? So you can imagine how these unconscious tendencies could manifest in some very detrimental ways with our students, which is why this topic is so very, very important. So at this time, I'd like to show you a short video that is based on the podcast Invisibilia, if you're familiar with that, just to see some examples of one potential harmful effect of implicit bias, and that is how it can impact our expectations for others. So let's give this a watch.
This is a man named Bob Rosenthal, and early in his career as a research psychologist, he did something very devious. Late one night, Bob secretly crept into his lab and he hung signs on all of the rat cages. Some of the signs said that the rat in the cage was incredibly smart, and some of the signs said that the rat in the cage was incredibly dumb, even though neither of these things was true. So then Bob brings this group of experimenters into his lab and says, for the next week, some of you are going to get these very smart rats and some these very dumb rats. And your job is to run your rat through a maze and record how well it does. So what did they find? It was not even close. The smart rats did almost twice as well as the dumb rats. Even though the smart rats were not smart and the stupid rats were not stupid. They were just all the same kind of average North Dakotan rat.
That almost to me sounds like the stuff of science fiction, like telekinesis.
Yeah, no one really believed him at first.
I was having trouble publishing any of this.
But what Bob eventually figured out was that the expectations that the experimenters had in their head actually translated into a whole set of tiny behavior changes.
Handling rats and handling them more gently can actually increase the performance of rats.
This kind of dynamic happens in people too.
You may be standing farther away from someone you have lower expectations for. You may not be making as much eye contact, and it's not something you can put your finger on.
That's Carol Dweck, a psychologist at Stanford. She was one of several researchers who explained all kinds of surprising things that expectations can influence, like teacher expectations can raise or lower a student's IQ score. A mother's expectations can affect the drinking behavior of her middle schooler. Military trainers' expectations can literally make a soldier faster or slower.
Think about that. As you go through the world, the expectations of other people are constantly acting on you, literally making you stronger or weaker, smarter or dumber, faster or slower.
Yeah. So my question was, how far does this go? So, Carol, for example, if I expect that if somebody jumps off a building, they will be able to fly, that's not going to work out so well, right?
Right.
So, what does science know about where we should draw the line?
That line is moving. As we come to understand things that are possible and mechanisms through which a belief affects an outcome or one person affects another person, that line can move.
So every time I watch that video, I can't help but reflect on my time in the classroom, and my interaction with one student in particular comes to mind. We'll call this young person Eric for right now. Eric is the student. He was a sophomore who most definitely dressed differently than I ever did in my life, wore his hair differently than I ever did in my life, among other things. And I'm sure, like many of you, I kind of prided myself that early in the term, I was going to get to know all of my students. And so I'd sit with Eric and I would get a lot of one-word responses to my questions, right? Which is not unusual, but for some reason with Eric, I decided to justify in my mind that, you know what, Eric, he's a passing student. He certainly wasn't excelling, but he was passing. You know what he really needs from me? He just needs to be left alone. Somehow I was able to justify that in my mind. And whenever I think about Eric, I have this immense feeling of regret that I didn't try harder to connect with that young person. And I just cannot help but wonder if my expectations for him were not colored by my implicit biases. And so I think a very important part of exploring implicit bias is really exploring our own internal selves and our pasts. And so that's in part why we had Sarah take you through the 10 most trusted activity. And so we'd like to come back and revisit that now. So you listed up to 10 people and the amount of time that you had that you trusted the most, that were not family members or blood relatives. And what we'd like you to do now is go back to that sheet or spreadsheet, and we'd like you to add some columns. And it's important to note, again, we're not going to ask you to share the specifics of this sheet, okay? Not at all. But we'd like you to add some columns like gender, age, race or ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, religion, or other categories that you might think of, and then start to sort of fill out your list so that the people you listed as the people you trust most, where do they fall in those categories? And we just want to look for some trends. You may or may not see some trends, but if you do, then we'd like you to think of, at the end, a 3-word or less summary of what you notice, okay? And for those of you that are courageous out there, we will ask you to share just that 3-word summary in the chat. You certainly don't have to if you're not comfortable with that. And we'll take about 3 minutes to have you fill out as much as you can here. But as you come up with these 3-word summaries, if you're comfortable enough, go ahead and start posting those in the chat. Thank you. when you're finished, whether you've posted or not, please go ahead and look through what some of our colleagues have posted thus far. Thank you so much for those of you that posted your summaries. And it doesn't happen for everybody, but most participants, when they go through this activity, will find that the people they trust the most are a lot like themselves. I remember going through this activity years ago, and I remember my 3-word summary was just like me. And again, our implicit tendencies are not the only factors at play here when thinking about who we trust, but we shouldn't deny their possible influence, right? And of course, this can impact who among our colleagues and who among our students we might trust more easily than others. So keeping that in mind, Sarah, would you like to cue up our next task for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to give you a little bit of time to talk about some of those things that are maybe coming up for you, some of the things that Pete talked about. So we have 3 different prompts here, and it's going to be your choice which of those you choose to answer. We're going to put you in breakout rooms with 2 other people, so you'll be in groups of 3. And you can talk, kind of the first question is more general, something that's coming up for you so far. The second question is specifically about that 10 most trusted activity that Pete just helped us through. How might those inform your professional relationships, so with your coworkers, your colleagues, or even your relationships with your students? And then if you want to zoom way out, that third question will kind of get us in tune for the rest of this webinar, which is, how might this implicit bias that Pete has been talking about affect our work in math education? And so you're going to actually have 5 minutes in your breakout rooms with 2 other people, and you can choose which of those questions you would want to answer. All right, Lindsay, you want to send us out? Perfect, thank you.
Luke, I'm going to send you to one.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for those discussions. I know that can be vulnerable at times, talking about these activities, but I got to listen in on a couple of groups and join some conversations, and just really good discussions happening. I heard, I was talking with a group about how we set expectations for kids kind of based on their demeanor, whether they seem motivated that day or seem willing to learn. Or even the idea that we might trust students that are more like us, and thinking about that 10 most trusted activity in terms of our students. So at this point, we're going to turn the corner a little bit and talk about, well, if implicit bias is this thing that we are now aware of, what can we do about it? So Pete, go ahead and tell us what we can do.
Yeah, so thanks, Sarah. Yeah, and thanks for those conversations, everybody. Yeah, so hopefully at this point, we're all kind of convinced that we all have implicit tendencies and that we can see how those could be harmful, right? So let's talk about what we can do. So the research is pretty clear that there's really 2 steps that we can take. And step number 1 is what I mentioned earlier. Whenever possible, we want to try to make what is currently implicit explicit. It's really the best thing we can do so that we can then do something about it, right? When it's implicit, we literally don't know that it's happening. Okay, so Sarah's going to talk about a very specific classroom example in just a moment, but one other way that you can do this that I'd like to talk about is by taking an implicit association test, or an IAT. These were started at Harvard 2 decades ago, and you can still go onto the website. This is one of the links that I'll send you, and take these IATs. And what an IAT is it asks you to compare 2 groups and associate those groups with either positive words or negative words. So one of the benign examples is it will ask you to compare flowers and insects. You're not going to be surprised by this, but most people, most of the time, have a bias towards a negative bias, that is, towards insects. Yeah, shocking, right? But you can also compare gender and race and ethnicity and age and disability and sexual orientation, and start to wade into those deeper waters and start to uncover some of those tendencies that maybe you didn't know were there. And I really want to encourage you to do that. Again, the whole definition of implicit bias is that we don't know that they're there. And so the first thing we should try to do is uncover those if we can. Once we've done that, step 2 is really to take up to 4 possible actions. And the first one we call intergroup contact. The intergroup contact is exactly like it sounds. It's just interacting with diverse groups of people. And when done over time, often enough, this has been shown to really mitigate both explicit and implicit biases. So the more we interact with these diverse groups of people, the more we start to chip away at some of the implicit biases we might hold towards said groups. Decision-making supports is the second one. So our implicit biases, like we mentioned before, are heightened when we're experiencing high cognitive load, and that can affect our decision-making, of course. And so decision-making supports are habits that we can form to serve as kind of a buffer against the negative effects of high cognitive load. So they include some very simple things like taking a break before making an important decision, or asking for someone else's opinion before making a decision. And we'll get into some more specifics in just a moment. The third one is mindfulness. This is near and dear to my heart as a certified mindfulness teacher. Mindfulness is defined as present moment awareness without judgment. And this kind of awareness helps us realize more quickly when our cognitive resources may have been depleted, making it more likely that we'll use one of those decision-making supports. So those two are really kind of linked. And mindfulness is often referred to as a practice because it is a skill that we can improve the more we practice it. And then finally, we can use counter-stereotypical exemplars, or CSEs. So this is when we use information, images, or narratives that defy common stereotypes or expectations. We can do this in our classroom, right? In the same way that our implicit biases are formed through repeated experiences, we can unlearn some of these associations through repeated exposure to these CSEs, okay? So let's get a little bit more specific. I'm going to throw it to Sarah for our first specific strategy.
All right, so I want to get real practical here for a couple minutes and talk about what steps we can take to make what is implicit or unconscious more explicit. And I'm going to talk specifically about how we can do that in our teaching with a practice that is called reflective teaching, which I'm sure you've heard of. And this is where we really look and dive deep into our own teaching. And there's a couple of ways we can do that. The first is you can actually video record or just audio record your teaching. And I know that that can be a little nerve-wracking. I've had to do it for a couple of programs that I've been a part of, and it is weird to then like watch yourself on tape and see all these decisions you're making that you're not even necessarily conscious of in the classroom. But it's a really, really good practice to notice things that you just don't notice when you're working on like 50 bajillion different things during a certain class period. You can have a colleague watch you, right? They can take you some notes. And the kinds of things that you're looking for, it can really vary. So for example, one of the things that I like to reflect on is just like where I am in the classroom. So one time I had one of my teaching friends, she was in the classroom. I just gave her a map of like where my tables were at, where the groups were at. And I was just like, please just tally how many times I am at each table. And that was so interesting because I like to think of myself as like, I'm equally talking with all these groups, it's pretty uniform distribution of where I'm going to be at during a class period. And the reality was that that actually wasn't true. There was a group that I was talking to way less frequently than some of the other groups. And now that doesn't necessarily mean that there was an implicit bias there, but it did help me or cause me to reflect a little bit about why is it that this group I'm not spending as much time with. Maybe it's because I think, oh, they already know it, they're kind of good on their own. Or maybe sometimes it's even the opposite of like, oh, I'm not sure they're going to get this particular concept, so let me go and see if I can help another group with it instead. So kind of thinking about where you are in the classroom. You can also pay attention to what, so the things that you're saying. And one of the ways that I like to do that is specifically like what questions you are asking students. So are you asking certain students only kind of those low-level basic questions and then saving your really rich conceptual questions for other students? That's something to be aware of. So, to some students, you're only like, hey, if we add 3 to this side of the equation, what do I have to do to the other side? Sometimes we do that as like a confidence booster, like we want them to get something right. We want them to have that success. But we're really kind of playing off of our implicit biases and our expectations of what we think students can do. And so on the next slide, we're going to look at a little tracking tool. And this really helps us in the who part of this reflection, which is what students am I calling on? Which students am I asking to present in front of the class? Because we know that that puts them in a position of authority. So for this kind of tool here, basically this teacher is going to give these students a problem. They're anticipating some of the solutions that students are going to use. I know there's a lot happening in this table, but I want you to kind of focus in on just the areas that I've circled in red, which is where the teacher is noting which students have a certain method, as well as which student they want to present that method. And you'll notice at the very bottom, this teacher is keeping track of students that have already shared that week or that unit. And this is a way to reduce implicit bias because sometimes, I know for me in particular, I am looking for that really complete, detailed student answer that I think is going to help the rest of the class. And so I have this bias towards students that I think are going to be able to present that to the whole class. I want everyone to learn. I want everybody to hear what the student said. But this kind of helps us be more reflective about, are we diversifying what students are coming to present, as well as the types of solutions, right? So it's not just, oh, the correct, super precise answer, but are we valuing the process that students used? So that's kind of a tool that you can use. You can make this yourself. There's plenty of ones online as well. All right, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. And now we'll kind of head into that second part, which is these actions that you can take. Once you've made what is implicit, explicit, one of the things that we can focus on is our intergroup contacts. And we've talked about that in terms of our personal and professional lives, in terms of who we're spending time with. We talked about that in the 10 most trusted activity. And that can also apply to our interactions with our students. So how we group our students, who we're selecting to come to the front of the room, and where we're focusing our attention and time. So all things that we can kind of track with a monitoring sheet or just by looking at a recording of our own teaching. And then Pete will give us a few more strategies.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So I'd like to share a decision-making support that I really like, which is called WOOP. WOOP stands for Wish, Outcome, Obstacle, Plan. And this is just a 3 to 5 minute process that we ourselves can go through, or that we can take our students through. And this is how it works. So step 1 is we name a wish, which is really just a feasible goal that we could set. I believe the researchers, though, used the term wish because, as silly as WOOP sounds, if they used goal, they'd have to call it goop, which is probably a little worse, right? So name a goal or a wish. Outcome is when we really think through, okay, what would be the best outcome if we really accomplished that goal or fulfilled that wish? So this actually helps us to clarify if our wish or our goal is a worthy one, right? Then obstacle, this is key in my mind. So this asks each of us to consider what in us might stop us from reaching that goal or fulfilling that wish. So this is internal, not an external obstacle, an internal one, which becomes really important when we get to P for plan, because the plan is all about what will we do if that obstacle rears its ugly head? If that arises, what will I do? And for some external obstacles, there's nothing to do, but for internal obstacles, there's always something to do. So why this decision-making support can be so helpful is that as we mentioned earlier, when we're experiencing a stressful situation, that high cognitive load, our implicit biases are much more likely to come out, which can lead to very biased decision-making, right? So thinking through our plan when we're not stressed, when we're not in the emotional throes of a situation, makes for much better decision-making that is less likely to be contaminated by our implicit biases. And also, let's be real, whether we like it or not, lots of our math students come to our class stressed out about math, right? So this is another tool that we can give them to help them alleviate some of the implicit biases that are infiltrating their decision-making as well. Okay, finally, I want to talk about a mindfulness strategy. So if you're not into being a daily 10 to 20 minute mindfulness practitioner, you might want to try SOTA. Okay, SOTA stands for stop, pause before acting, observe, be mindful of your thoughts and emotions, detach, look at the situation through an objective lens, and awaken, shift to see another person's perspective. This is one possible way to utilize the skill of mindfulness without having to set aside 20 minutes a day. And I hope you really see how mindfulness, the mindfulness action, is connected to the decision-making support action. Mindfulness makes it much more easy that we'll remember to use those decision-making supports, okay? Because if we're aware of our thoughts, we're aware of our feelings, we're aware of our surroundings, we are much more likely to make good choices. Okay, Sarah, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah. So we just want to take one more minute to do a little bit of reflection. And so we're going to take about 60 seconds, and I'd like everyone to write kind of their biggest takeaway from today's webinar, and we'll be sharing those in the chat. So I'll give you about 60 seconds to start writing some things in there, and then we'll kind of read off some of the things that we noticed. So what's something that you are taking away from this webinar today? Pete, you got some music for us?
I will now.
Perfect.
I promise I will.
Also seeing a couple of things about mindfulness, how we might be able to use that with our students. Yeah, analyzing our own teaching tendencies, excellent. That link between expectations and outcomes. Yeah, and I like even some of the things here about being aware so that we can make changes, right? And awareness is kind of that first step there. Yeah, making them explicit. I like that. Thanks.
And I'll just add too that I think it's really common, at least I'll just speak for myself, to feel some guilt or shame when thinking about our implicit biases. And I guess what I've learned is that it's just not very useful, right? I mean, it's understandable for sure, but it's not useful. We all experience implicit bias based on things that were outside of our control, right? Just our experience, our upbringing. So feeling that guilt and that shame as quickly as possible, we ought to try to move past that if we can. So, hey, thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining Sarah and I for this webinar. We really, really appreciate your time, whether you're live here with us or you're watching this recording. I will send out the slide deck, the recording, and some relevant links to you shortly after the recording downloads. And thank you so much for your time. Best of luck for the rest of the school year.
Have a great night. Thank you so much for coming.